Letitia Jandro, a bodybuilder with an impressive physique, a successful husband, and then he vanished without a trace. Paul's BMW 5 Series remained parked in the garage, covered in a thin layer of dust, as if it hadn't been used for days. But the growing sense of unease intensified as strange details began to emerge. Why was Christmas wrapping paper taped over the windows in the middle of summer? Why didn't Letitia want to talk about her husband's disappearance? Why was there a strong, persistent odor of decomposition in the house? And who or what was hiding in the closet? The mysteries surrounding Letitia continued to pile up. What was she hiding? And more importantly, where was Paul Jandro, Moyock, North Carolina, June 30, 2010? It was supposed to be just an ordinary Wednesday morning. But for Safety Inspector Dennis Carter, that day was anything but normal. For the first time in nearly 2 years, his colleague Paul Jandro did not show up for work. Paul was always punctual. He had never missed a day. But that morning, his phone went unanswered, and his messages were ignored. A sense of unease grew among Carter and his coworkers. They decided to report the matter to the authorities. The next morning, a deputy sheriff was dispatched to Jandro's home for a welfare check. Upon arrival, she found Paul's truck parked outside, but there was no sign of him. She knocked on the door, called his name, but the house remained eerily silent. Concern deepened when Paul's colleagues suggested calling his wife, Letitia Jandro, an employee at a defense contracting firm. However, when the police contacted Letitia at Blackwater, she simply stated that she hadn't seen her husband that day and had no idea where he was. Things took an even stranger turn when, shortly after that phone call, Letitia, the 37-year-old wife, also vanished without a trace. A husband and wife disappearing within the same time frame, no clues, no explanations. Although she was once an outstanding high school athlete, Letitia Jandro never attended college. The former track and field star had gone through 2 failed marriages before meeting Paul Jandro in the summer of 2002. At the time, Paul, 42 years old, was preparing to leave the Navy after more than 20 years of service. He retired with the rank of commander and quickly started a new career at a defense contracting firm in Norfolk. But Paul was not a typical retiree. With his extensive experience, he adapted easily to his new life. The first time he met Letitia, he was immediately drawn to her. At 29, she had a toned, muscular physique and an energetic presence. In fact, Letitia was even stronger than Paul. They quickly became workout partners, and within weeks, their relationship evolved beyond just training together. Less than a year later, on June 28, 2003, Letitia and Paul officially married, marking the beginning of a new chapter in both their lives. Letitia always exuded toughness, while Paul was friendly and approachable. When meeting Letitia for the first time, she barely interacted with anyone, reserved, distant. In contrast, Paul was cheerful and easygoing. Despite their contrasting personalities, they stayed together. Paul had a stable income at Bay, and Letitia also transitioned into the defense industry, joining a private training facility operated by Blackwater USA, one of the largest military contractors in the country. Their life seemed to be going smoothly, stable careers, a promising future. But then, tragedy struck, one that would test their marriage in ways no one could have foreseen. In 2006, after a long struggle with infertility, Paul and Letitia finally received good news. But their happiness was quickly overshadowed by tragedy. In July, Letitia went into premature labor. The twins could not be born healthy. One baby did not survive before birth, and the other lived for only 42 seconds. The immense pain devastated Letitia. She fell into deep despair and developed post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, from the loss of her children. To cope with the grief, Letitia threw herself into training, doubling her hours at the gym. She immersed herself in female bodybuilding competitions and won, channeling her pain into a relentless drive to push herself beyond her limits. Paul was proud. of his wife's achievements. He kept photos from Letitia's competitions and even built a home gym in their Moyac house to support her training. He did everything he could to encourage and motivate her, but instead of bringing them closer, the distance between them grew. Paul's friends began to notice something. He was no longer Letitia's husband. He was becoming her trainer. By 2008, 2 years after the tragic loss of their twins, Letitia had become so independent that she was emotionally distant from her own husband. They rarely spent time together, like two ships silently passing in the night. Paul slept in an upstairs bedroom while Letitia spent her nights downstairs. They lived under the same roof, but in reality, they were completely separated. She had her own life. So did he. Paul grew increasingly frustrated with the arrangement. After nearly 8 years together, he had endured enough. Perhaps he wanted to leave. Perhaps he was ready to move on. But the question was, would he ever get the chance? Because just days later, Paul vanished, and Letitia began acting strangely. There was Christmas wrapping paper taped over the windows despite it being July. She refused to talk about her husband's disappearance, and a putrid smell of decomposition began creeping through the house. Even so, she agreed to take time off work and return home to meet with the police. When Letitia arrived at the house, she and the female deputy entered together. The house was a mess. There was no sign of Paul. From the moment his disappearance was reported, Paul's colleagues and neighbors felt that something was wrong. 2 of his co-workers decided to drive to his house to check on him. As they pulled into the driveway, a bizarre sight unfolded before them. All the windows were covered with Christmas wrapping paper in the middle of summer. Inside, they found Letitia standing in the dark. The lights were off. Every window was sealed shut. But the strangeness didn't end there. Letitia was wearing a cloak, pulled up to cover most of her face. Dennis, one of Paul's co-workers, stared at her and asked bluntly, "Have you seen Paul?" "Yes," Letitia replied, but Dennis didn't believe her. He met her gaze, his eyes sharp. "I don't believe you." The accusation made Letitia furious. The atmosphere became unbearably tense. The Christmas wrapping paper on the windows, Letitia's reaction. The vague accusations about Paul. Everything felt terribly, horribly wrong. Dennis and his colleague quickly left the Jandro home. And as soon as they stepped outside, the door slammed shut behind them. However, Dennis didn't go straight home. His instincts told him something wasn't right. So he spent time talking to Paul's neighbors, hoping to uncover some clue. The next day, on July Honest, Paul's co-worker, Kyle Cheatwood, along with another employee from Bay Systems, decided to drive down to his house for another check. When they arrived, Paul's truck was still parked out front, but what caught their attention was the person unloading items from the truck. It wasn't Paul. It was Letitia. What was she doing with her husband's truck? And why did her every action radiate an air of secrecy? Kyle immediately contacted the authorities. When the police arrived, Letitia seemed irritated. She claimed she was just cleaning up. When asked about the furniture, she gave a curt response, "There's nothing." She even allowed the detectives to check the trunk of her car, as if she wanted to prove she wasn't hiding anything. But soon after, her demeanor shifted, agitated, snappy, snapping at anyone who mentioned Paul. Once again, authorities found no trace of Paul, no evidence of a struggle, nothing suspicious. But there was one thing they knew for sure: Paul hadn't simply run off with another woman. The investigation team decided to call Paul's cell phone, hoping it would lead them closer to the truth. And then a crucial signal appeared. Paul's phone was still on, and it was pinging off cell towers in Elizabeth City. The search for Paul Jandro grew more intense. As soon as investigators detected a trace of his presence, they immediately drove to Elizabeth City, scouring every hotel in hopes of finding a lead. Had Paul simply grown tired of his marriage and left for a few days? Or was something far more sinister at play? Armed with a copy of Paul's driver's license photo, they approached hotel staff one by one, asking if anyone had seen him. Some employees vaguely recalled seeing a white man in his 50s who resembled Paul. When they arrived at the Hampton Inn, they found key witnesses. Several staff members confirmed they had seen Paul the previous night. They were so close to the missing man, or at least they thought they were. Paul's co-workers continued to call his phone, but there was no answer. Then, more than 24 hours after he had vanished, the phone was finally picked up. But it wasn't Paul on the other end. Instead, the voice of a construction worker came through. He said he had found the phone in perfect condition, undamaged, almost as if someone had deliberately placed it there. That same day, Letitia unexpectedly reached out to investigators. But she wasn't calling to ask about her husband. She had only one question. Did the police come to my house today? Authorities arranged to meet with Letitia later that day. But when they arrived at the scheduled time, she was gone. On the door of her house, they found only a small note that read, "I went out for a walk." They searched everywhere, but Letitia was nowhere to be found. Less than 72 hours after Paul Jandro disappeared, his wife, Letitia, had vanished as well. Police immediately launched a large-scale search operation. It had been 3 days since Paul, 50, had failed to appear for work in Norfolk. And now, Letitia Jandro, 37, was gone from their home in Moxville. But then, suddenly, on July 2, 2010, Letitia called 911. Her voice was calm, not panicked. She refused to disclose her location. But the strangest part? Tracking data showed that the call had been made from inside her own house. Immediately, police surrounded the home, preparing for a forced entry. Once they secured a search warrant, they moved in under the cover of night. As they entered the garage, something immediately caught their attention. A massive pile of trash sat in the middle of the space. They pushed further inside, guns drawn. The air was thick with an eerie silence. And then, finally, they found her. Letitia was lying motionless on the floor of a bedroom closet. For a moment, they thought she was dead. But no, she was still alive. Letitia was taken into custody as authorities began their long-awaited search of the house she had so desperately tried to keep them out of. During questioning, Letitia claimed she believed someone had tried to break into her home. She also denied knowing where Paul was. One of the officers suddenly entered the interrogation room. He didn't say a word. He simply leaned down and whispered into his colleague's ear. In the garage, hidden beneath the foul-smelling pile of trash they had discovered earlier, investigators had just pulled out a 50-gallon plastic bin. The moment they opened it, an unbearable stench filled the air, the smell of decomposition. Inside, something was tightly wrapped in multiple layers of plastic and fabric. As the flashlight beam shone through, a lock of human hair peeked out from between the layers. It was a body. The investigators immediately contacted the medical examiner and the North Carolina Bureau of Investigation to confirm the victim's identity. Meanwhile, they returned to the interrogation room, where Letitia was still pretending to know nothing. The interrogator said, "I'm giving you one last chance to tell the truth, because we already know where Paul is." Her story began to change. At first, she continued to deny killing Paul. But then, she offered a new explanation. She claimed she knew who had done it. According to Letitia, it was drug dealers, men she had supposedly hired to teach Paul a lesson because she was angry with him. But why would a random group of drug dealers target Paul? Was Letitia telling the truth, or was this just another lie? As Letitia sat in the interrogation room, scrambling to come up with a convincing story, investigators continued searching her home. And then they found undeniable evidence. In a corner of the floor, something felt off. A section of carpet had been glued down with industrial adhesive. When they peeled it back, the sight underneath sent chills down everyone's spine. Blood everywhere. But that wasn't all. On the wooden floor beneath the carpet, they found multiple bullet holes, along with more bullet holes piercing the walls of the bedroom. Letitia had tried to cover them up using putty to fill each one, Police then inspected Letitia's car. Inside, they discovered a .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol. There was no more room for deception. When the medical examiner analyzed Paul's body, they confirmed that it was riddled with bullet wounds. The evidence was overwhelming. Letitia was immediately charged with murder. She was handcuffed and taken straight to the police station. But just when investigators thought the case was closed, Letitia suddenly made a shocking confession. A completely unexpected twist was about to unfold. On July 4, 2010, Letitia Jandro had been in custody for nearly 24 hours. Meanwhile, police were still piecing together the horrifying details of the murder. Paul's body had been discovered inside a 50-gallon plastic container, wrapped in multiple layers of plastic, a desperate attempt to hide the truth. But the traces of the crime could not be erased. Even though Letitia kept insisting that she had only hired someone to teach Paul a lesson and that they had gone too far, investigators did not believe her story. The .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol found in Letitia's car was confirmed to be the murder weapon. When Paul's body was examined, the recovered bullets matched the caliber of the gun. But then came a shocking revelation. When police contacted Paul's family, they learned that Paul had been planning to file for divorce. In fact, he had given Letitia a deadline, June 30, to leave the house. And that was the very day he disappeared. Not long after, Letitia was booked into Currituck County Jail on murder charges. But in the end, she was the one who shattered all the lies. She reached out to investigators. She wanted to talk, and her final confession changed everything. I shot Paul. Letitia claimed that everything started when Paul gave her an ultimatum to leave the house. I met with a lawyer, and they told me I didn't have to go. But when she told Paul this, she claimed that he became more terrifying than ever. He spent an entire month trying to scare me into leaving. Every morning, the moment I woke up, he would kick the door hard. I was terrified, and I was prepared to defend myself. Then came June 30, Paul's final deadline for Letitia to leave. According to Letitia, that morning, Paul stormed into the bedroom. But this time, he wasn't just kicking the door like before. This time, he was holding a rifle. He pointed it at me and said, "Get the hell out of my house right now," Letitia claimed. She said Paul gave her 5 minutes to leave before turning his back and walking out. But instead of running away, Letitia went to get her gun, and then she opened fire. I shot into the room and I hit him once. He staggered back and I shot him again. When he ran toward me, I kept shooting. He tried to grab the gun from me, but I just kept shooting. The shooting only stopped when Paul collapsed. Afterward, Letitia panicked. She spent 3 days trying to hide his body, deny everything, and even fabricate a story about drug dealers teaching Paul a lesson. But the evidence police found told a different story. In September 2012, the trial of Letitia Jandro officially began. The prosecution completely rejected her claims of self-defense. Paul's death was not self-defense. We believe Letitia ambushed him. She did not want a divorce, and so she killed Paul out of her need for control. Letitia's defense collapsed under the weight of undeniable evidence. Bullet holes in the floor and bedroom walls, proof that she fired repeatedly without hesitation. The .45 caliber handgun found in her car, which matched the bullets recovered from Paul's body. Her efforts to cover up the crime, cleaning up blood, wrapping the body in plastic, and lying to the police. The prosecutor emphasized Paul never had a chance to fight back. This was not self-defense. This was a deliberate murder. On September 28, 2012, the North Carolina courtroom was packed. Paul Jandro's family, friends, and colleagues were all there, holding their breath as they waited for the verdict. After months of legal battles, Letitia Jandro's fate now rested in the hands of the jury. Authorities believed they had an airtight case. Backed by overwhelming evidence, Paul's body was found inside Letitia's home, wrapped in multiple layers of plastic and stuffed inside a 50-gallon tote. The bullet holes in the floor and walls suggested a premeditated murder. The .45 caliber gun recovered from Letitia's car matched the bullets in Paul's body. Letitia's shifting stories, first denying everything, then finally admitting she had shot her husband. The prosecution firmly rejected Letitia's self-defense claim, stating, "This was not self-defense. This was a cold, calculated murder." The jury took only 1 hour and 40 minutes to reach a verdict. What does that number say? A trial that lasted for months. Yet the jury needed less than 2 hours to come to a unanimous decision. There was no doubt in their minds. And then the verdict was announced. Leticia Jandro, guilty of first-degree murder. The judge wasted no time in delivering the sentence. Life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Amanda Kaua was once a single mother, struggling to make ends meet, until she met Ira, the man who gave her what seemed to be a perfect little family. But behind the facade of happiness, Amanda sensed the storm brewing within her husband. Ira seemed to be battling invisible demons, and he began to suspect that Amanda, too, was hiding secrets of her own. Did these suspicions drive Ira to despair, and ultimately to his own death? Or was his tragic end not just an act of desperation, but one with a helping hand? New Underwood, South Dakota, November 28, 2010. A frantic 911 call came from 27-year-old Amanda Kaua. In the call, she tearfully stated that her husband, 26-year-old Ira Kaua, had shot himself in the head. When deputies and emergency medical personnel arrived at the scene, they found Amanda waiting outside, looking dazed. She led them down to the basement, where Ira lay motionless. Inside, police discovered Ira lying on a futon, surrounded by a large pool of blood. A gunshot wound to the head had taken his life. Amanda insisted that her husband had committed suicide. She claimed he was depressed, hopeless, and saw no reason to continue living. Everything seemed straightforward, a tragic suicide with nothing suspicious. But as investigators began to verify Amanda's statements, they soon realized that the truth was far from simple. Born in 1983, Amanda Kurowski spent most of her life in the Dakotas, though she grew up in Hillsboro. A popular girl in high school, her life took an unexpected turn when she became a mother at 18. Her son was born in 2001, followed by a daughter in 2003. However, Amanda was a single mother, struggling to raise 2 children on her own. By 2005, at the age of 21, she was living in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment, trying to support her family under difficult circumstances. But in February of that year, her life changed forever when she met Ira Kaua, an Air Force pilot, at a bar in Grand Forks. Ira had grown up in a trailer park, a quiet and sensitive young man. On February 2005, he turned 21 and decided to celebrate this milestone at a bar where fate led him straight to Amanda. Just months into their relationship, Ira told his friends in the military that he and Amanda were married. No longer a single mother, Amanda now had a husband, but life remained challenging for their young family. She worked at a convenience store on the base while studying to become a hairstylist. Meanwhile, Ira's Air Force salary wasn't enough to cover their expenses, so he took on night shifts delivering pizzas to earn extra money. Despite the hardships, Ira never complained about supporting Amanda's children. In fact, he genuinely loved and cared for them as if they were his own. In 2007, Ira and his family moved to Ellsworth Air Force Base near Rapid City. Despite being busy with their new life, he continued his education and graduated with a bachelor's degree in 2009. His job at the Officer Candidate School opened up promising career prospects, marking a significant advancement in his professional life. Once settled in Ellsworth, the couple decided to buy a house and started planning for their future. After nearly 5 years together, the children were already calling Ira Dad. To make this bond official, Amanda and Ira filed for adoption. A stable career, 2 growing children, and the prospect of expanding their family, it all seemed like a great accomplishment for a couple still in their 20s. However, not everything was going smoothly. Some of Ira's friends noticed that pursuing a master's degree was putting immense pressure on him. The couple had little time for each other, and they tried to rekindle their bond by going out for drinks. But by the summer of 2010, Ira had almost stopped going out, while Amanda continued. She went to the bar 2 to 3 times a week, not because of alcohol addiction, but simply to relax and socialize. At the bar, Amanda often chatted with Kim Karp, the bar owner. In one conversation, she admitted that she didn't necessarily love Ira. She knew he would take care of her and the kids, and for her, that was enough. But over time, Amanda felt that Ira was becoming increasingly emotionally needy. According to her, he often cried, seeking comfort, and was becoming more emotionally dependent on her. Was this just a sign of a troubled marriage? Or was there something deeper and more unsettling happening in their family? Tension was mounting for Ira. He worked full-time, from 7:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. every day, while also carrying the responsibilities of being a husband and father of 2. The physical and emotional exhaustion was taking a toll on him. Amanda confided in Kim that Ira had fallen into deep depression. According to her, by September he had become so desperate that he went to the garage and attempted to hang himself. Was this a tragic warning of what was to come? Or was there something more sinister behind his despair? On November 28, 2010, a panic 911 call was made. Amanda Cower, her voice trembling, reported that she had just found her husband, Air Force pilot Ira Cower, dead in the basement. When police arrived at the scene, they found Amanda sobbing, leading them to where Ira's body lay on a futon mattress, covered with a blanket. A gunshot wound to the head had taken his life. Initially, all signs pointed to suicide. On Ira's bedside, officers found a note in which he mentioned the pressure of work weighing down on him. But one crucial detail made an officer question the situation. If Ira had shot himself, where was the gun? Amanda explained that after discovering her husband, she had picked up the gun and put it away for safety, not wanting the children to see it. She showed the police where she had placed it on top of the refrigerator, wrapped in a towel. The weapon was a Bersa, .45 caliber pistol. After confirming Ira's death, paramedics left the scene, while investigators from the sheriff's department arrived to conduct a thorough examination. And that was when they discovered something unusual. Ira hadn't been shot once, but twice. Blood in Ira's hair had concealed a second gunshot wound. This immediately shattered the suicide theory that Amanda had described. No one could shoot themselves in the head twice. Ira's body was transported to the Rapid City morgue for an autopsy, while Amanda was taken to a public safety building for a formal interrogation. The investigation into Ira Cower's death had now taken a dramatic turn. It was no longer just a suicide, but a mystery filled with disturbing questions. During questioning, Amanda Cower insisted to investigators that her husband, Ira, had been struggling emotionally for a long time. She claimed he had previously attempted suicide multiple times, and this time he had succeeded. Amanda stated that she had actually heard the first gunshot. According to her, at around 7 a.m., she was lying in bed when she was startled by a loud noise coming from the basement. Worried, she went to the basement door and called down to Ira, asking what had happened. But according to her, Ira responded, "Nothing." Believing that he had simply dropped something or had gone back to sleep, Amanda continued her morning as usual. She took the children out for breakfast and went to the Ellsworth Air Force Base commissary for groceries. At approximately 12:30 p.m., when she returned home and was putting the groceries away, Amanda walked to the top of the basement stairs and called for Ira. This time he didn't respond. Sensing that something was wrong, she went downstairs and found her husband lying motionless in a pool of blood. Panicked, she pulled a blanket over him, picked up the gun, carried it upstairs, and called 911. Everything seemed logical until investigators asked one key question: where did Ira get the gun? Amanda explained that since Ira was in the Air Force, he wanted her to own a firearm for self-protection. After much persuasion, she finally agreed, and they purchased a gun registered in her name. But something didn't sit right with the investigators. What kind of man pressures his wife into buying a gun for protection only to then use that very gun to kill himself. The following day, investigators received the medical examiner's autopsy report. It confirmed that the first shot had been to the side of Ira's head, while the second shot was in the center of his head. According to the medical examiner, the first gunshot was not immediately fatal, but it was severe enough to render Ira brain dead. The examiner was adamant Ira would not have been able to fire a second shot. Ira hadn't died by suicide. Someone had pulled the trigger again. On the morning of November 29, 2010, exactly 24 hours after Amanda Cower's frantic 911 call, news of Ira's death had spread throughout the small town of New Underwood and Ellsworth Air Force Base. But not everyone believed that Ira had taken his own life. Investigators from the Pennington County Sheriff's Department shared the same doubts, not just because Ira had been shot twice, but because of a crucial finding in the autopsy report. Ira could not have fired the second shot himself. At this point, Amanda's suicide narrative had almost completely collapsed. Investigators traced the .45 caliber pistol that had ended Ira's life and discovered that it had been purchased at a pawn shop. When questioned, Amanda claimed she had bought the gun at Ira's request. She said that her husband and their 2 children had waited outside in the car while she went inside to make the purchase. However, security camera footage from the parking lot revealed a different truth. Amanda had gone to the pawn shop alone, without Ira or the children. It didn't stop there. The shopkeeper also vividly remembered Amanda. He recalled that he had initially tried to sell her a .22 caliber pistol, but Amanda had immediately rejected it. Her words at the time were unforgettable. "I need a gun that can take down an average-sized man." As investigators left the pawn shop, they were nearly certain Amanda Cower was not the grieving widow of a suicide victim. She was a murderer. But the biggest question remained. Why did Amanda want Ira dead? That same day, the case took a shocking turn when Ira's close friend, James Mills, called the sheriff's department with a startling lead. According to Mills, Ira had long harbored suspicions he believed his wife, Amanda, was having an affair. Her alleged lover? None other than Dallas Madsen, a local ranch owner. Mills revealed that Amanda and Dallas frequently met at a bar, and their relationship seemed far more intimate than just friendship. 2 months before his death, Ira had confronted Amanda about the affair. Immediately, investigators headed to the local bar to verify the claim. The bar owner confirmed that Ira hadn't just confronted his wife, he had also directly questioned Dallas about his relationship with Amanda. But how had Dallas reacted? Was he just an unfaithful lover, or did he play a bigger role in Ira's death? And most importantly, if Ira had discovered Amanda's infidelity, was that the reason she wanted him gone? 2 days after the shooting, on November 30, the police decided to bring in Dallas Madsen for questioning. At first, Dallas denied all accusations, insisting that he was just a friend of Amanda. But when pressed, he was forced to admit the truth. He and Amanda were romantically involved. However, Dallas firmly maintained that he had nothing to do with Ira's death and had no knowledge of what happened that night. The police set Dallas aside and turned their attention back to Amanda. Immediately after questioning Dallas, investigators confronted Amanda Cower. When they informed her that Dallas had cooperated with authorities, she began to panic. She became flustered, confused, and visibly anxious. Finally, she decided to confess. According to Amanda, Ira had fired the first shot himself. When she came downstairs, he was still alive. As she turned to call 911, Ira stopped her and begged her to end his suffering. The police were immediately skeptical. With his first gunshot wound, Ira wouldn't have been conscious enough to speak, let alone plead for Amanda to kill him. Investigators continued pressing her. When caught in a lie, Amanda quickly changed her story again. This time, she claimed that Ira was holding the gun when she entered the basement. She tried to wrestle it away from him, and during the struggle, the gun accidentally went off. But the police didn't believe her. Ira's wounds didn't match a struggle for the gun. Cornered, Amanda finally admitted the truth: she had murdered her husband. The police immediately arrested Amanda Cower, charging her with first-degree murder. On June 7, 2011, 28-year-old Amanda Cower walked into a South Dakota courtroom to face charges for killing her husband. Since the beginning of the investigation, Amanda had changed her story multiple times. First statement: she claimed she found her husband dead when she returned home. Second statement: she confessed to helping him die after a failed suicide attempt. Third statement: she insisted she accidentally shot Ira while trying to stop him from taking his own life. Final story: she described a struggle for the gun, saying that Ira was gravely wounded after the first shot and begged her to end his suffering. She reluctantly fired the second shot, but the police didn't believe any of her stories. Ira's injuries proved he couldn't have pleaded for anything after the first shot. Then came the most damning evidence. Amanda's internet search history revealed a chilling truth. She had researched firearms, comparing different calibers .22.40.45, knowing that a .22 caliber gun wasn't powerful enough to kill someone with a single shot. She specifically chose a .45 caliber pistol, a gun strong enough to ensure an instant, fatal outcome. On the morning of November 28, 2010, while the small town of New Underwood was still enveloped in tranquility, a silent tragedy unfolded in the basement of Amanda Cower's home. Just hours before the shooting, Amanda accessed two websites with chilling content: how to shoot someone in the head for an instant kill. She then walked down to the basement, aimed directly at her husband, Ira Cower, and pulled the trigger. However, the first shot did not kill Ira immediately. Amanda went upstairs as if nothing had happened and continued preparing breakfast for her children. Her plan was clear: wait for Ira to bleed to death while going about her daily routine. But there was one thing Amanda did not anticipate. Ira was still alive when she returned home in the afternoon. Seeing him barely clinging to life, she went back online searching for answers. Why hadn't he died yet? At that moment, Amanda realized the first shot hadn't been fatal enough. Coldly, she walked down to the basement again and fired a second shot, ending Ira's life. To cover up her crime, she staged the scene as a suicide, even planting a mysterious suicide note next to his body. Prosecutors feared that Amanda's fabricated suicide scenario might sway the jury. To prevent this, they offered her a plea deal. If she admitted guilt, her charge would be reduced to first-degree manslaughter, carrying a maximum sentence of 65 years, instead of facing life imprisonment for first-degree murder. On June 7, 2011, Amanda entered the South Dakota courtroom. Before the judge, she pleaded guilty but still clung to her false narrative, insisting that the first shot was accidental during a struggle. She admitted to firing the second shot, but claimed it was to end her husband's suffering. Prosecutors were frustrated by this half-hearted confession. They approached the judge with an unusual request. If the judge agreed, they were prepared to take her to trial for first-degree murder. On September 19, 2011, the South Dakota courtroom was tenser than ever. After hours of intense arguments, both sides fought to present their strongest cases. But there was a major issue. There wasn't enough concrete evidence to convict Amanda Cower of first-degree murder, meaning it could not be definitively proven that she had premeditated her husband's killing. In the end, the judge issued the verdict. Amanda was sentenced to over 32 years in prison before becoming eligible for parole. While it wasn't the harshest possible sentence, Ira Cower's family and friends felt satisfied. Justice had been served, but was it enough? Ruby in Ruffalo, a sharp mind, she almost achieved straight A's in law school. Her husband John was no less intelligent, but tragedy struck when he mysteriously died. John's death sparked an investigation filled with shocking accusations, and chilling secrets gradually came to light. It was as if a voice from beyond was guiding the truth into the light. Can a dead man speak? Or is someone playing a dangerous game? Amid the grief of widowhood and the whirlwind of legal battles, Ruby was forced to fight not only to seek justice for her husband, but also to protect her own freedom. Langford, British Columbia, October 25, 2003. After a week of relentless rain, a hiker followed a trail in Mount Wells Regional Park. On the outskirts of Victoria, the narrow path ran parallel to an old, abandoned drainage pipe. As he stepped down near the pipe, he suddenly froze. Something looked strange. Emerging from the darkness of the pipe, something sent a chill down his spine. A hand. His heart pounding. The hiker realized he had just stumbled upon a corpse. Without hesitation, he immediately called 911. Within minutes, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrived at the scene. The body of a white male, in his mid-30s, was discovered in the West Shore area of Langford. No identification, no visible wounds. He hadn't been stabbed. He hadn't been shot. But what had killed him? The victim's identity was quickly confirmed. John Ruffalo, 36 years old, who had been reported missing 5 days earlier by none other than his wife, Ruby. Ruby Anjuba was born in 1956 in a remote community in Terrace, British Columbia. From a young age, she showed intelligence and promise, enrolling at the University of Victoria. However, upon arriving in Victoria, a familiar pattern began to emerge in her life. Ruby dropped out, got married, quickly divorced, and then fell into a new relationship. Unfortunately, both relationships were fraught with abuse. Each romance left her with a child, and by the age of 30, Ruby was struggling to raise 4 children on her own. Life became increasingly difficult, and in 1986 she decided to return to her family's farm in Terrace. But 2 years later, in 1988, she left once again, this time returning to Victoria without her children. Back in the city, Ruby was determined to change her life. She went back to school, completed her degree, and it was there that she met John Ruffalo, a man 11 years younger than her. Despite the age gap, they quickly formed a bond. John was outgoing, charismatic, and passionate, while Ruby was drawn to his warmth and devotion. In April 1990, they got married. Ruby's children from previous relationships remained with their family, while she and John built a new home together, welcoming a daughter. Although Ruby had a university degree and John did not, she chose to stay home to care for their child while John became the family's breadwinner, working hard to support them. As Ruby continued to pursue her education, John became increasingly involved in real estate. However, studying law was never easy, and life wasn't always smooth. In 1998, shortly after Ruby graduated from law school, John suddenly faced charges for violating the Real Estate Act of British Columbia. Once again, turmoil struck, presenting new challenges for their marriage. John eventually broke the law and was convicted of 22 offenses. However, instead of serving prison time, he was only fined $14,000 and forced to give up his job as a prison guard. Meanwhile, Ruby's career was also struggling. Despite graduating from law school, she found herself unemployed, unable to secure a foothold in the industry. Marital tensions escalated. The relationship between Ruby and John became so distant that they no longer even shared the same bed. Long work days and the pressures of life made the household atmosphere suffocating. Even their 12-year-old daughter, Giovanna, could sense the growing rift between her parents. That summer, John seemed increasingly detached from his family. One night, he bluntly asked his daughter, "Do you want me to leave?" Giovanna, though still a child, understood that her parents' marriage was on the verge of collapse. Yet John promised her that he wouldn't go. But that promise didn't last long. Not long after, John mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind unanswered questions. On the evening of October 19, 2003, just before 11:00 p.m., the shift manager at Brink Security called Ruby Ann Ruffalo. His voice was tense as he asked, "Where's John? He didn't show up for work." Ruby was confused. She didn't know where John was, or Over the phone, her bewilderment was as evident as the manager's concern. But the real worry began the next morning when John still hadn't returned home. Ruby started feeling uneasy. She turned to Vivian Kirkland, a close friend who lived in the basement apartment of her house. The two women quickly went to the police station to report John missing, but the police remained unfazed. They told Ruby not to worry because John had been missing for less than 24 hours. Maybe he just got drunk somewhere and will be home soon, they reassured her. However, the day passed with no sign of John. By evening, when the 24-hour mark since his disappearance was reached, his family and friends were genuinely alarmed. John's phone rang non-stop. Messages flooded in. Ruby seemed to be spiraling into panic. One of her tenants recalled that she paced back and forth incessantly, so anxious she was nearly frantic. By October 22, 2 days after John was reported missing, his family began to believe that something terrible had happened. That afternoon, John's brother-in-law was refueling at a local gas station when he suddenly recognized a familiar-looking car. As he moved closer to inspect it, he confirmed it was John's car. But John was nowhere to be found. Alarmed, his brother-in-law immediately called the police. When officers searched the vehicle, they found a suspicious detail. John's wallet was still inside, along with his identification. This raised a series of questions. Why would John abandon both his car and wallet? Where had he gone? And most importantly, what had really happened to him? The police immediately tried to contact Ruby to inform her of the discovery and to ask more about John. Strangely, it took them until the next day to reach her. Shortly afterward, the police received a call from Ruby's lawyer. He said that Ruby wanted to meet with them and was willing to assist in the investigation. When Ruby arrived at the police station, she wasn't alone. Beside her was Vivian Kirkland, her loyal friend. During the interview, Ruby explained that Vivian was there for emotional support, while her lawyer accompanied her to ensure everything proceeded properly. When asked about her husband's disappearance, Ruby admitted that it was highly unusual. John would usually call me or leave a message, she said. But then she followed with an even more shocking claim. John might have been involved in a dark secret. According to Ruby, John had a habit of using drugs. She had even left him briefly because of it, but they eventually reconciled. However, she never fully trusted him. And just days before John went missing, Ruby claimed she had found evidence to support her suspicions. While cleaning the house, she discovered that John had hidden a large sum of cash, $7, taped to the back of a cabinet. But when the police searched Ruby and John's home, they found no trace of the cash she had mentioned. The $7 had vanished, and so had John. Was this merely a coincidence? Or did John have a real reason to hide the money? Were drug dealers hunting him down? A new theory began to emerge. Perhaps John was on the run due to debts owed to drug traffickers. But to the police, this scenario seemed unconvincing. John's family didn't believe it either. As investigators continued to track and verify Ruby's statements, they noticed a major issue. There was no evidence to suggest that John was a drug addict. A heavy user couldn't possibly manage 3 jobs at once. It was almost impossible. John's sister outright rejected this theory. There's no way he would just leave, she insisted, worry etched across her face. And as each day passed without any sign of John, his family began to fear the worst. Saturday, October 25, 6 days after John's disappearance, a hiker descending from Mount Wells Regional Park stumbled upon a horrifying sight, the body of a man inside an old drainage culvert. Panicked, he immediately called 911. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police quickly arrived at the scene, calling in a crime scene analyst to assist with the situation. As investigators pulled the body from the culvert, they compared it to a photo in the missing persons file. The results confirmed the family's worst fears. The deceased man was John Ruffalo. The grief of losing him was already devastating, but the way he was found left his family even more haunted. What had killed him At first glance, the body showed no signs of beating or obvious violence. Hoping to find answers, investigators hiked up the mountain to what was believed to be the entrance of the culvert. There, they discovered discarded drug paraphernalia. This evidence seemed to align with Ruby's claim that John was a drug user. But was it really true? Had John overdosed and died tragically? The police weren't entirely convinced. Something felt off. Drug addicts didn't typically wander into the woods to inject themselves. And if John had truly been an addict, why did none of his family and friends believe it? On the night of October 26, 2003, officers from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police knocked on the door of Ruby Ann Ruffalo's home in the suburbs of Victoria. Just a day earlier, a hiker had discovered the body of her missing husband, John Ruffalo. He was only 36 years old. Ruby had reported John missing 6 days prior. Just 2 days before his body was found, she had told investigators that John was a drug addict, possibly in debt, and even suggested that he might have taken his own life due to the pressures of drugs and money. At first glance, John's death seemed to align with Ruby's statement. But was that really the case? While John's family and friends mourned his loss, investigators began asking questions. An initial theory suggested that John might have taken his own life with drugs. But there was a major problem. Many details didn't add up. If John had truly walked up the mountain to inject himself, why was his car found abandoned more than 8 miles away? And if John hadn't gone there himself, then who had taken his body up the mountain? The next question, who had done it? On October 28, 2003, an unexpected witness came forward, providing police with a shocking statement. This witness was Robert Johnson, a man struggling with alcoholism. He claimed that Ruby Ann Ruffalo, along with her close friend Vivian Kirkland, had approached him and offered him an $8 bottle of sherry, a cheap bribe, but one tempting enough for someone like Johnson. But the most shocking part was Ruby's request. She wanted him to do a special job, a gruesome task, to kill John Ruffalo. Johnson recounted that he had immediately refused. However, Ruby didn't give up. She listened to Johnson's suggestion for a more discreet method of murder, a hot shot, a lethal overdose of heroin, ensuring the victim's death without leaving any trace of foul play. This statement could not be taken lightly. Police recalled what Ruby had previously claimed, that John was a drug addict. They had also found drug paraphernalia near where John's body had been discovered. Everything was starting to connect into a suspicious plot. But Johnson's story wasn't over. He went on to reveal that on the night of October 19, the night John disappeared, Ruby had contacted him again. When Johnson arrived at her house, he was shocked to see Ruby and Vivian Kirkland standing in the driveway with John's lifeless body. Ruby had offered him more alcohol in exchange for his help disposing of the corpse. But once again, Johnson refused. He walked away, leaving Ruby and Vivian standing there with a dead body and a dark secret. If Johnson's story was true, this was a premeditated murder. But what puzzled the police was the motive. If Ruby truly wanted her husband dead, why had she only offered Johnson a cheap bottle of wine? And for someone with a law degree like Ruby, why would she attempt to recruit a homeless alcoholic to carry out her plan? As police were still considering the credibility of Robert Johnson's testimony, 2 more unexpected witnesses came forward, making the case even more disturbing. This time, it was Jonathan Horton, an 18-year-old, and his mother, Linda, a former tenant of the Ruffalo family. Linda revealed a shocking truth. More than a year and a half before John's disappearance, Ruby Ann Ruffalo had approached her son and offered him money to kill her husband. Jonathan told the police that he had immediately refused. But instead of letting it go, Jonathan's mother, Linda, confronted Ruby directly. Ruby's reaction? Not a single denial. In fact, according to Linda, Ruby even repeated the offer to her, offering to pay her to kill John Ruffalo. And once again, the offer was rejected. This revelation raised a puzzling question. If John knew that his wife had plotted to kill him, Why did he continue living with her for another year and a half? Any ordinary person who discovered their spouse wanted them dead would immediately go to the police or leave. But John didn't. The reason might lie in another secret one that John's mother revealed to the police. John Ruffalo had been having an affair, and he was planning to file for divorce. Toxicology results seemed to confirm Robert Johnson's account of a hot shot, a lethal dose of heroin strong enough to kill instantly. But there was an even more crucial detail. Although Ruby had claimed John was a drug addict, there were no signs of chronic drug use. Only a single needle mark was found on John's arm. This suggested that the fatal heroin dose could have been his first and only injection, one that someone else had administered. Not only that, but heroin wasn't the only substance found in John's body. Tests also detected amitriptyline, a drug that can cause paralysis and render a victim defenseless. Could Ruby have mixed the drug into John's food or drink, knocking him unconscious before injecting him with heroin? The only problem was, how could police prove it? On March 3, 2004, the investigation into John Ruffalo's mysterious death took a critical turn. Police searched Ruby's home, including the basement apartment of Vivian Kirkland, her close friend and a potential accomplice. There they found a prescription and a bottle of amitriptyline in Vivian's room. A chilling coincidence. This was the exact drug found in John Ruffalo's body during the autopsy. On March 4, 2004, Canadian police returned to Ruby Ruffalo's home. This time, they weren't just there to gather more evidence, they were there to arrest both Ruby and Vivian Kirkland. Ruby Ruffalo, the prime suspect, was completely stunned as the handcuffs snapped around her wrists. She didn't utter a word, but the shock was evident on her face. Soon after, both women were taken to the police station. As the interrogation room door closed, Ruby remained eerily composed. She refused to make any statements and immediately requested a lawyer, a classic move for someone well-versed in the law. But Vivian Kirkland was different. Held in the interrogation room next door, Ruby's closest friend became the center of the investigation. Detectives were determined to uncover her true role in John Ruffalo's death. At first, Vivian tried to deny any involvement, but how long could she stay silent when the evidence against her kept piling up? On March 3, 2009, nearly 6 years after John Ruffalo's body was found in the woods outside Victoria, British Columbia, and almost 5 years after Ruby Ruffalo's arrest, she finally stood trial for her husband's murder. John's family had waited far too long for justice, and what angered them most was that Ruby had spent nearly 5 years out on bail, free as if nothing had happened. With a law degree from one of Canada's top universities, Ruby knew the legal system inside and out, and perhaps she had used that knowledge to delay the case, hoping it would fade into obscurity. But Judgment Day had come. That morning in court, the prosecutor opened the trial with a statement that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Ruby Ruffalo had killed her husband because he was leaving her. But this was not just a crime of passion. John had planned to divorce her, and that meant dividing assets, a prospect Ruby could not accept. To her, everything they owned, from real estate investments to every dollar in their bank accounts, belonged to her, not to John. And when she realized she might lose it all, Ruby took action. But the prosecutor had more than just a theory. They had a crucial witness, someone who had once been Ruby's most loyal accomplice, Vivian Kirkland. After years of protecting Ruby, standing by her side like a shadow, Vivian finally broke under the weight of the investigation. She testified, exposing the entire murder plot that Ruby had orchestrated. With overwhelming evidence, on November 18, 2010, the judge delivered the final verdict. Ruby Ruffalo was guilty of first-degree murder. Her sentence, life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. After nearly 8 years of uncertainty, pain, and despair, John's family could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Justice had been served. The man they loved, a husband, a son, a brother, had not died in silence. Though nothing could ever replace their loss, at least they knew that the perpetrator had been rightfully punished. I can't generate an image right now, but could you describe the scene in more detail? For example, the surroundings, the girl's emotions, or the dominant colors in the picture. This will help me prepare a better description when I can create images again. The trial of Ana Trujillo. With all the evidence against her, investigators officially charged Ana Trujillo with murder. On March 31, 2014, she walked into a packed courtroom in Houston's Harris County Courthouse. The case had become a media sensation. Headlines labeled her as a 45-year-old massage therapist accused of brutally murdering her 59-year-old scientist boyfriend. The public was captivated by the shocking details. During the trial, both sides fought fiercely to prove their case. The defense argued that Ana acted in self-defense, that Stefan had attacked her, and she did what she had to do to survive. The prosecution, however, completely disagreed. They painted Ana as a violent and aggressive woman who had mercilessly beaten her partner to death. In the courtroom, prosecutors made their final plea. Ana Trujillo savagely murdered her lover. Nothing stopped her from doing it. Nothing will stop her from doing it again. She deserves a life sentence. Put her away forever. Then came the moment of truth. Ana waited anxiously as the jury deliberated. Finally, the verdict was announced. Guilty. The verdict: a life sentence. Ana Trujillo was found guilty of murder. The jury rejected her self-defense claim, concluding that she had intentionally killed Stefan Anderson. But the most shocking moment came after the verdict. Instead of breaking down or showing remorse, Ana stood up defiantly and declared, "I do not regret what I did." She showed no fear, no remorse, no concern, only cold defiance. The judge and jury had seen enough. Ana Trujillo was sentenced to life in prison for the trial of Ana Trujillo. With all the evidence against her, investigators officially charged Ana Trujillo with murder. On March 31, 2014, she walked into a packed courtroom in Houston's Harris County Courthouse. The case had become a media sensation. Headlines labeled her as a 45-year-old massage therapist accused of brutally murdering her 59-year-old scientist boyfriend. The public was captivated by the shocking details. During the trial, both sides fought fiercely to prove their case. The defense argued that Ana acted in self-defense, that Stefan had attacked her, and she did what she had to do to survive. The prosecution, however, completely disagreed. They painted Ana as a violent and aggressive woman who had mercilessly beaten her partner to death. In the courtroom, prosecutors made their final plea. Ana Trujillo savagely murdered her lover. Nothing stopped her from doing it. Nothing will stop her from doing it again. She deserves a life sentence. Put her away forever. Then came the moment of truth. Ana waited anxiously as the jury deliberated. Finally, the verdict was announced. Guilty. The verdict: a life sentence. Ana Trujillo was found guilty of murder. The jury rejected her self-defense claim, concluding that she had intentionally killed Stefan Anderson. But the most shocking moment came after the verdict. Instead of breaking down or showing remorse, Ana stood up defiantly and declared, "I do not regret what I did." She showed no fear, no remorse, no concern, only cold defiance. The judge and jury had seen enough. Ana Trujillo was sentenced to life in prison for the brutal murder of Stefan Anderson. Her weapon of choice? A 5.5-inch high, heeled shoe, a murder so shocking that it left an entire city in disbelief. Bananoy, type tok chat GPT, tuanoy. That was the final part of the story. Ana Trujillo was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Stefan Anderson. After the trial, the case continued to attract public attention due to its bizarre nature, a high-heeled shoe used as a deadly weapon. Many people debated whether Ana had truly acted in self-defense or if she was a cold-blooded killer. Despite her conviction, the trial of Ana Trujillo With all the evidence against her, investigators officially charged Ana Trujillo with murder. On March 31, 2014, she walked into a packed courtroom in Houston's Harris County Courthouse. The case had become a media sensation. Headlines labeled her as a 45-year-old massage therapist accused of brutally murdering her 59-year-old scientist boyfriend. The public was captivated by the shocking details. During the trial, both sides fought fiercely to prove their case. The defense argued that Ana acted in self-defense, that Stefan had attacked her, and she did what she had to do to survive. The prosecution, however, completely disagreed. They painted Ana as a violent and aggressive woman who had mercilessly beaten her partner to death. In the courtroom, prosecutors made their final plea. Ana Trujillo savagely murdered her lover. Nothing stopped her from doing it. Nothing will stop her from doing it again. She deserves a life sentence. Put her away forever. Then came the moment of truth. Ana waited anxiously as the jury deliberated. Finally, the verdict was announced. Guilty. The verdict: a life sentence. Ana Trujillo was found guilty of murder. The jury rejected her self-defense claim, concluding that she had intentionally killed Stefan Anderson. But the most shocking moment came after the verdict. Instead of breaking down or showing remorse, Ana stood up defiantly and declared, "I do not regret what I did." She showed no fear, no remorse, no concern, only cold defiance. The judge and jury had seen enough. Ana Trujillo was sentenced to life in prison for the brutal murder of Stefan Anderson. Her weapon of choice? A 5.5-inch high heeled shoe, a murder so shocking that it left an entire city in disbelief. Bananoy, type tok chat GPT tuanoy. That was the final part of the story. Ana Trujillo was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Stefan Anderson. After the trial, the case continued to attract public attention due to its bizarre nature, a high-heeled shoe used as a deadly weapon. Many people debated whether Ana had truly acted in self-defense or if she was a cold-blooded killer. Despite the trial of Ana Trujillo, with all the evidence against her, investigators officially charged Ana Trujillo with murder. On March 31, 2014, she walked into a packed courtroom in Houston's Harris County Courthouse. The case had become a media sensation. Headlines labeled her as a 45-year-old massage therapist accused of brutally murdering her 59-year-old scientist boyfriend. The public was captivated by the shocking details. During the trial, both sides fought fiercely to prove their case. The defense argued that Ana acted in self-defense, that Stefan had attacked her, and she did what she had to do to survive. The prosecution, however, completely disagreed. They painted Ana as a violent and aggressive woman who had mercilessly beaten her partner to death. In the courtroom, prosecutors made their final plea. Ana Trujillo savagely murdered her lover. Nothing stopped her from doing it. Nothing will stop her from doing it again. She deserves a life sentence. Put her away forever. Then came the moment of truth. Ana waited anxiously as the jury deliberated. Finally, the verdict was announced. Guilty. The verdict: a life sentence. Ana Trujillo was found guilty of murder. The jury rejected her self-defense claim, concluding that she had intentionally killed Stefan Anderson. But the most shocking moment came after the verdict. Instead of breaking down or showing remorse, Ana stood up defiantly and declared, "I do not regret what I did." She showed no fear, no remorse, no concern, only cold defiance. The judge and jury had seen enough. Ana Trujillo was sentenced to life in prison for the brutal murder of Stefan Anderson. Her weapon of choice? A 5.5-inch high heeled shoe, a murder so shocking that it left an entire city in disbelief. Bananoy, type tok chat GPT tuanoy. That was the final part of the story. Ana Trujillo was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Stefan Anderson. After the trial, the case continued to attract public attention due to its bizarre nature, a high-heeled shoe used as a deadly weapon. Many people debated whether Anna had truly acted in self-defense or if she was a cold-blooded killer. The trial of Ana Trujillo, with all the evidence against her, investigators officially charged Ana Trujillo with murder. On March 31, 2014, she walked into a packed courtroom in Houston's Harris County Courthouse. The case had become a media sensation. Headlines labeled her as a 45-year-old massage therapist accused of brutally murdering her 59-year-old scientist boyfriend. The public was captivated by the shocking details. During the trial, both sides fought fiercely to prove their case. The defense argued that Anna acted in self-defense, that Stefan had attacked her, and she did what she had to do to survive. The prosecution, however, completely disagreed. They painted Anna as a violent and aggressive woman who had mercilessly beaten her partner to death. In the courtroom, prosecutors made their final plea. Ana Trujillo savagely murdered her lover. Nothing stopped her from doing it. Nothing will stop her from doing it again. She deserves a life sentence. Put her away forever. Then came the moment of truth. Anna waited anxiously as the jury deliberated. Finally, the verdict was announced. Guilty. The verdict: a life sentence. Ana Trujillo was found guilty of murder. The jury rejected her self-defense claim, concluding that she had intentionally killed Stefan Anderson. But the most shocking moment came after the verdict. Instead of breaking down or showing remorse, Anna stood up defiantly and declared, "I do not regret what I did." She showed no fear, no remorse, no concern, only cold defiance. The judge and jury had seen enough. Ana Trujillo was sentenced to life in prison for the brutal murder of Stefan Anderson. Her weapon of choice? A 5.5-inch high, heeled shoe, a murder so shocking that it left an entire city in disbelief. Final part of the story: Ana Trujillo was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Stefan Anderson. After the trial, the case continued to attract public attention due to its bizarre nature, a high-heeled shoe used as a deadly weapon. Many people debated whether Anna had truly acted in self-defense or if she was a cold-blooded killer.